Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rei-Lin bringing you some more Armored Warfare today. This time it's going to be a little bit of a revisit on an old premium tank. It was one of the first that was in the game, and that is the Abbot, the new, basically revamped Tier 3 Abbot, which has been moved up to Tier 4 status, along with the other two artillery pieces, the Gvosdika and the M109. Now, before we go into comparing the stats here, and I will do a quick comparison, if you owned prior to patch 0.15 the normal Tier 3 Abbot, it was taken away from you basically, updated to Tier 4, and then you were given a free Tier 3 premium tank, the Abbot VE, which is, it's good. It's not as good as the original Tier 3 Abbot, but essentially what they did is they just basically moved the Abbot up and split it into two different tanks. However, I'm not exactly sure why they did that. Maybe they just felt that they needed more artillery at Tier 4? Not quite sure. But either way, we'll take a quick look at the statistics here. As you can see, the Tier 3 does 140 damage per shell. The penetration is 17 millimeters. The damage per minute is 946. And the reload time is 22 seconds. These stats are almost identical to what the Abbot had at Tier 3 originally. The damage penetration is exactly the same, but the damage per minute is significantly lower because of the reload time. This tank used to be under 15 seconds of reload, and it is an autoloader. It used to fire, and still does fire, 3 shells per clip. And with that reload time now bumped up to 22 seconds, you can see that the damage per minute really suffers because of it. The health is pretty much crap at 565. You're basically going to get two-shot from anything that shoots at you, because you have, as you can see here, absolutely no armor whatsoever. It's artillery, so don't think you're going to be bouncing any shells from anything. You're basically in trouble if anything spots you. The max speed is the same as it used to be, 46.8 kilometers an hour, and I will say that they did buff the 0 to 32 kilometer per hour speed up by a couple of seconds. It now takes 8.27 seconds instead of over 10 seconds to get from 0 to 32. The camouflage stayed the same at 0.1. View range is not bad for artillery at 355 meters, but generally if you're spotting something at 355 meters, you're probably going to be spotted in return and die. The cannon depression over the front is 5 degrees. Over the rear, it's 7 degrees. Now, that might not mean much to people because it is artillery and you're generally not going to go tank destroyer mode in armored warfare with your artillery, but it does have an advantage when you're trying to drop your smoke rounds to cover yourself. It means that you can aim the gun a little bit closer to the ground and get yourself more or less in the middle of the smoke. It does get 4 smoke rounds, so that might be kind of useful. The accuracy is 0.12, which isn't bad for artillery. The aim time is 3.11 seconds, and the turret traverse is abysmally slow. It's basically hand cranked at 11.76 degrees per second. However, you're not going to have the Abbot VE unless you already owned the original Tier 3 Abbot. So not very many people were probably going to have this unless they were tank collecting and went ahead and bought it. But these stats are almost identical to the original Tier 3 Abbot outside of this massive increase to the reload time. If this was still down at 15 seconds, and to be honest, I think at Tier 3, there's no reason for this to be at 22 seconds. I mean, that's almost 3 times more than the worst tanks reload at Tier 1, 2, or 3. So, I mean, yes, it is the lowest tier artillery you can get, and so that's all well and good. I would still think that, 15 seconds for the Tier 3, that's more than enough reload speed. The damage per minute can be a little bit higher, I think, because the artillery, you have to play the artillery game. Even in PvE, you're going to be shooting back at enemy artillery. And to be able to support your team, having to reload that long, especially at these low tiers where tanks don't have that much armor and they don't have much health to begin with, it just kind of gets boring, to be honest. So I think they nerfed that a little bit too hard. Otherwise, the stats are almost identical to the original Tier 3 Abbot. But like I said, you're not going to have the VE unless you already owned the original Abbot. And here it is, the updated, upgraded Tier 4 Abbot. And as you can see, it's not that big of an upgrade. 162 damage, and keep in mind that I do have both of the Abbots decked out with the same skills on the crew and the same consumables and the same retrofits, as they are essentially the exact same tank when it comes to what retrofits and consumables and crew they get. So 162 damage. So the damage did go up just a little bit by about 20. The penetration went up by 2 millimeters. The damage per minute went up by about 100. But the reload time stayed the same at 22 seconds. And the health went up by about 100. Everything else about the tank stayed almost exactly the same as the VE version. Even the max speed, it actually is a little bit slower to get from 0 to 32 kilometers an hour. But camo, view range, gun depression, it's a little bit more accurate by 0.01 degrees. The aim time is the same, and of course the turret traverse is still abysmally slow. So basically what you got here is, if you didn't already own the Abbot, you might think this was pretty good. Keep in mind that this is also the same as the VE version. It is an autoloader. It is the only autoloader you get at the Tier 3, Tier 4 bracket, so it is kind of unique in that aspect. At 162 damage per shell, you're going to get roughly 600 damage per clip, which sounds like a lot, but more or less that just depends on where you hit the tank and what kind of armor that tank has that you're shooting at. The Abbot is not going to be penetrating much of anything at Tier 4 that has 19 millimeters of armor, so most likely each shell you do is going to come nowhere close to 162 damage. And if we look down here at the ammo, a penetrating hit could do up to 216 damage per shot. So that's pretty good, but penetrating any tank at Tier 4, 5, or 6 is just, it's going to be luck if you do that. But what I want to compare this to is the other two Tier 4 artillery. You can buy these in the dealer tree as you would any other tank. So let's just take a quick side-by-side here of the other Tier 4. So we have the Gvosdika and we have the M109. So you can see right off the bat that the Abbot is not doing too well in the damage department. The M109 is nearly over 102 damage more per shot, and the Gvosdika is about 60 or 70 damage per shot more. They both have better penetration than the Abbot. They both do more damage per minute than the Abbot. They have significantly less reload times than the Abbot, but keep in mind these two are single shot per reload. You don't get autoloaders here. So that is one thing that sets the Abbot apart. The health is actually in favor of the Abbot. The Abbot does have more health than either of the other two, which both have 585. Their armor on all three is crap, so there's no reason to even think that it matters what those values are. The Gvosdika and the M109 are both faster, and they both take less time to get from 0 to 32 kilometers per hour. The Gvosdika has pretty good camo when compared to the Abbot, and the M109 actually has slightly worse camo when compared to the Abbot. The cannon depression here on these tanks, the Gvosdika gets it the worst off. The M109, being American, has 5 degrees over the front and over the rear, so it matches the Abbot more or less in usefulness as far as gun depression goes. The Abbot does have better accuracy by slightly over the Gvosdika and by a great deal over the M109. The aim time is kind of in the middle. It's not as good as the Gvosdika, but it's much better than the M109. And of course the turret traverse is basically the slowest of all of them. So what you're looking at here is the Abbot is kind of, I guess you would say, in the middle. If you're worried about doing damage, the Abbot is not the tank for you. Although I will say that the M109 and the Abbot do have better view range than the Gvosdika. But as I said, these stats, if you're spotting for yourself, you're probably not going to be alive much longer. So at the end of the day, what you've got here is a run-of-the-mill Tier 4 that is basically a premium artillery. I liked it better as a Tier 3 simply because it was unique. You didn't have any other Tier 3 artillery, so it was kind of like in a zone all to itself. So it was kind of unique, and if you wanted to try out artillery just to see if you like the play style, you would get the Abbot and try it out. And because it wasn't a super high tier or anything like that, you had a lot less chance that you were going to run into a lot of bad matchups for the tank. You'd probably end up in, especially in PvE, with a lot of tier 1 or 2 bots, maybe a tier 4 here and there. But now that you're at tier 4, you still can't do hard modes, so you're still fighting tanks that don't have that much health, they don't have that much armor. But if you get into a bad matchup where you're fighting tier 5s and tier 6s, 19 millimeters of penetration and only being able to do 162 damage with your high explosive means that more tanks are not going to take very much damage from the Abbot. I've actually had several shots that I've hit on MBT 70s because I've got into a tier 6 match before, and I've done about 20 damage per shot, and that's hitting the ass end of that tank. So if you're hitting something heavily armored just to try to soften the tank up for the rest of your team, you're probably not going to be able to do very well in the Abbot. And there's another disadvantage because it is an autoloader. That's playing the artillery game. Every time you fire without moving, the enemy artillery get a ping on the map. And in PvE or in PvP, it works both ways. When the computer fires and doesn't move, because it generally doesn't move, you get a ping. Every time they fire, that ping gets smaller and smaller until it's basically pinpointed you exactly where you're sitting. Autoloaders, the problem with that is you're going to end up wanting to fire all 3 shells once your clip is loaded, because that's kind of the point. You want to get as much damage out there and then relocate while you're reloading. That sounds good in theory, but because the pause between the shells is a couple of seconds, the travel time between shots is a few seconds, and your aim time is over 3 seconds, you're still going to be sitting there for well over 7 or 8 seconds, and that's more than long enough for our enemy artillery to aim at you, zoom in, and hit you hard in return. And because you have absolutely no armor, the likelihood is that if you're fighting Gvosdikas or M109s, there's a good chance you'll almost get one shot. And if it doesn't one shot you, you're going to get wrecked as far as killing crew and modules on your tank goes, because it is high explosive and they do a lot of damage to those components. So firing 3 shots in a row, even in PvE, is very risky unless you know that you're aiming directly at the enemy artillery. You know where they're sitting, you've seen where they fired from, and you're just returning fire after you know that they're in the process of reloading. So it makes it very dangerous when you're playing the arty game to have an autoloader. I'm not saying you can't do damage, I'm not saying they're not useful, and I'm definitely not saying that the Abbot is the worst tank ever. But when comparing it right here flat out against the other tier 4s, I find it really hard to recommend buying the Abbot at this point. Before you would buy it at tier 3, it was very, very, very good because you did not have artillery at tier 3. So it was really fun and unique. And so at this point, it still costs 1,000 gold from the dealer tree, which is $5 worth of gold. It's not a bad way to spend $5 if you want to support armored warfare and get a premium tank. But at low tiers, it's really hard to make a lot of damage in the Abbot because of the low damage per shot. Even if I get lucky, and I'm talking dead on lucky, and hit something like a bagel panzer in the ass end with all 3 of my shots, I might do around 550, 600 damage. But over the course of a match, I'm probably not going to bring in much more than 2,000 or 3,000 damage. And it has to be a particular kind of map that's very good for artillery. Fighting on Albatross, for example, might be good for artillery, or something like Wildfire, one of those maps is kind of open, might be really good. But fighting on a map, say Kodiak, where 90% of the map is a city area with lots of buildings and lots of places the enemy tanks can hide, you're not going to get very much damage. And I tried to get some good replays just in playing both of these tanks since they've changed them to see if there was any significant differences. And half the time I could barely scrape by with about 2,500 damage. At this point, a lot of people are using tanks that do a lot of damage, and they know the maps, they know where the spawns are. So if your team knows what they're doing, you're not going to have much opportunity to really do a lot of damage in the Abbot, especially with that 22-second reload. Honestly, I think the Gvosdika is probably one of the best artilleries to get at tier 4, simply because the reload time is about what some main battle tanks reloads is. And at tier 4, it has penetration that's okay enough to go through the rear and side of a lot of tanks, especially the lights and the AFVs, and the damage is respectable, and you can bump that up, especially if it's a penetrating shot. So overall, I don't think that the Abbot got much of a buff going from Tier 3 to Tier 4. I didn't expect it to. The original Tier 3 Abbot, because it used to have, like I said, a 15-second reload, the damage per minute was over 1,200. And that could be enhanced a little with your consumables and retrofits. If you're going to buy this tank, you have to be willing to let a lot of its shortcomings go, simply for the fact that you want to try out the artillery as it is in Armored Warfare. That's pretty much the only thing you're going to be trying out with this vehicle. It does play differently. It's obviously not like artillery in World of Tanks, so if you're still deciding one way or the other whether or not you want to try out the artillery, the Abbot is still a good purchase for $5 to just try it out. Or if you're a tank collector, as I said in a lot of my other premium tank reviews, if you're a tank collector, you're going to have this already. You probably have the VE already. If you're new to the game and you're looking for a premium tank to get, I would not suggest getting the Abbot unless you're dead set on wanting to try out the artillery. And if you're coming from World of Tanks and you're an artillery player, that might be something you're interested in. But as it stands, this is still a unique tank at Tier 4, simply because it is the only autoloader artillery at Tier 4, but it didn't get kind of like a Tier 4 buff. I would have loved to have seen this be more like Bert the Avenger from World of Tanks, that just zoomed around at 65 kilometers an hour with a 0 to 32 kilometer an hour acceleration of like maybe 5.5 seconds or something like that. I mean, that would have at least made it a little bit more unique, just beyond the fact that it's an autoloader. It could be the fastest of all of the artillery at low tiers, because most artillery still are just like this, even at high tiers. They have no armor, they have low health, they have bad mobility, they have bad speed. They're relying completely on their team and their camouflage to keep them safe, so they can wing shells on the other side of the map and do some damage. It would have been nice to just have seen this tank get a little bit more of a buff in the mobility department, or maybe have that reload time be a little bit lower than 22 seconds. Yes, you're firing 3 shots, but boy, 22 seconds is a long time in Armored Warfare to not be shooting at tanks. This is my opinion on the new Abbot. I still think it is an okay tank. It is still a unique vehicle when it comes to artillery, because it is an autoloader, so it is a slightly different gameplay style than the other two artillery, the Gvosdika and the M109. However, I don't know if it's enough of a uniqueness to fire 3 shells instead of just 1, because of how long that reload time is. It does kind of put you off. You know, Armored Warfare is a much faster paced game than World of Tanks in most respects, so sitting around for 22 seconds just kind of makes it a little bit of a snooze fest. And having a tank that's this slow with that long of a reload, yeah, it helps that you can, decide to move to other areas during that reload, so it's not quite as boring, because you're relocating to make sure you don't get counter-artied. But in PvE, it's not so big a deal as it used to be, since they've now changed the idea that arty will no longer just focus fire straight on you, and they will pick other targets while you're reloading. So the threat of counter-arty isn't as big as it used to be, so you can still have some fun with the tank. I think if you're only going to spend $5 to get it, it's still worth having a premium tank at low levels. If you got some friends that play low levels every now and then, it's still good. You do have your smoke rounds, and you get 6 now instead of just 4. So you can make a difference if it's a map and you're playing PvE, or even in PvP. You can drop smoke rounds on the cap and protect everybody that's in there, because the enemy won't be able to see through the smoke unless they get in there pretty much right in the cap circle with them. So either way, the Abbot got itself split into 2. The Tier 4 I don't think is as good as the original Tier 3, but then again, it's nice that now you have several options at Tier 4 as opposed to just the 2. Now you have 3, and at least it's still unique as far as the autoloader goes. It can do some damage, it can wreck things, but it's very, very situational. Anyway, that is going to do it for this video. It's a little bit shorter. I'm not going to include a replay. If you want to see a replay of the Abbot gameplay style, you can check out my channel. I've got videos on the Abbot, and you can see how it plays in PvE. And pretty much nothing has changed in the gameplay aspect from the Abbot. It's still just as it was at tier 3. But anyway, that's going to do it for this video, guys. I hope you liked it. I hope I helped you out a little bit. If I did, if you liked the video, if it helped, please press the like button down below. It does help out the channel. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe, you can click down at the bottom of your screen just right about now, and that'll get you all the updates every time I upload a new video. And I'm looking forward to getting some more replays. Keep those replays coming in, guys. I have an email address down below in the description. You can send me Armored Warfare replays, whether it's PvP or PvE, high tier, low tier, any tank, anytime. Send a couple of those files. They're pretty small files, and I'll get those compiled into a little replay system of whatever that I can do for you all. And eventually I wanted, like, when Obsidian gets around to making to where I can start gifting people gold and tanks and packages of tanks and gold, and I will start picking out replays and holding contests and start pushing the channel in that direction. We're just waiting on Obsidian. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.